Every element of a piece of artwork requires its opposite in order to achieve balance. There needs to be a contrast in order to create balance. Let's begin by looking at angles and curves. These two things exist in contrast, and because of this, they have an important relationship to each other. You may have heard the phrase opposites attract. Such a phrase would be well suited to describe the elements on your canvas. I wanted to create an image to show you how curves and angles interact with each other. So I created an image that is all curves. This is an unbalanced image, but I knew that adding angles would turn it into a good composition. A curve needs an angle to be balanced, and an angle needs a curve. When I added the angles, I was left with a composition that I like, but it didn't really highlight the relationship between angles and curves. The problem is it's very difficult to isolate these elements from everything else on the canvas. This image includes colour, and that colour needed to be balanced. It also has a balance between space and detail. When we create a piece of artwork, we need to balance everything, every contrasting element at the same time, and this can be a challenge. I tried to strip back the image as much as possible. Here is my layer of curves drawn as a simple line drawing. You'll notice that I didn't cross any of the lines in this image. When two curved lines cross, it immediately creates an angle. It's strange that when you create a lot of curves and they all overlap, it starts to balance itself with the creation of lots of angles. Although you should try to be aware that if you create an image that is curves and keep overlaying those curves in order to create angles, then you need to consider the amount of space in relation to detail, because layers and layers of line work can become cluttered. You've got to balance both of those contrasts at the same time, space and detail and curves and angles. I wanted this layer to only contain curves because I want to show you the contrast and the balance that is created when we add angles. We now have an image that contains curves and angles, and those two elements are balanced. But overall, the image doesn't seem balanced, and that's because I introduced another element with another contrast. There is also black ink on white paper. The colours black and white are two contrasting elements, and when you look at this image, you can see there is an imbalance. The angles and curves are balanced, but the colours black and white aren't balanced. One option is to add more black to the canvas. I've added black in some of those spaces. This creates more balance between the elements black and white, but some of the lines have been lost to the shapes that have been created. The angles and curves were nicely balanced, and I want to retain that balance. Let's go back to here, because I did say there were other options in how to create this image. I needed to add more black to the canvas, so I replaced some of those white areas with block areas of black colour. However, the black is nicely distributed across the canvas. I can add more black by changing the width of the lines. The black has become more dominant. There is definitely more black on the canvas. However, there is still more white than black. Black and white exist in sharp contrast because they are two extremes. To balance something, we don't have to use one of those extremes. Instead, we can use something that exists in between the two colors.
Grey is a point of harmony between those two extremes, but I didn't choose any grey. I specifically chose a dark grey, one that is closer to black than white. When I did this, it slightly tips the balance in black's favour. The black is now balanced with the white because grey is a mix of them both, and this grey contains more black than white.
This could be a finished piece. Because it has a high level of balance, the curves are balanced with the angles, black and white are in balance, and there is also a good balance between the level of space and detail.
You might be thinking that's great for abstract artwork, but what about realistic images? Well, the same principles are also true for realistic artwork. For example, consider any realistic image and you will notice that there is a balance between light and shade. I think there is a lot to learn from photography in this area, because when a photographer takes an image, they must balance those two aspects. As an artist that works in realism, you don't want a scene that is too light or too dark. This is my version of The Virgin and Child by Elisabetta Sorani. You'll notice that it balances black and white through the use of grey. This is something that we've just looked at in this lecture. This is my version of Christ in Glory by the artist Pompeo Battoni, and you'll notice that it balances black and white. It doesn't use grey, but that isn't always necessary. There is so much detail in this image, and it is all created with black lines. That means that there is a lot of black on the page. The image is balanced. The original of these two artworks include colour, but recreating them in black and white gave me the opportunity to examine the balance between black and white. In a realistic image, that balance of black and white is found in the contrast between light and shade. Creating abstract artwork is an excellent way of exploring balance, and everything that you learn also applies to the process of creating realistic images.